Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
To save a town, two sides had to overcome mutual loathing and possibly some hate as well. What are we talking about? Well, in John Day, Oregon, there was a venomous battle in a polarized nation, and it unfolded between loggers and environmentalists in a timber town like the one snow-capped Blue Mountains of Eastern Oregon. And the reason we're talking about this today is really there's a couple different things to discuss. One is just the nature of the timber industry, which, in case you weren't aware, is an important part of our everyday life. Timber is still one of the primary building materials in most residential construction. So very important from that aspect. It also accounts for a lot of jobs in rural areas, especially obviously if they're near forests. And so there's that side of it. There's the climate side of the timber conversation as well. And then possibly equally, if not more important, is this other side, which is this town figured a way through the problem. Opposing sides were able to sit down and not only talk through it, but now are able to sit down, as some might say, as friends, and actually have a good time agreeing to disagree, but finding room to move forward. And if we're about anything here at the State of Us, it's that. And it's the very reason that we're going to talk about this topic today. But of course, a conversation on timber, the climate, and the future of America getting along would not be complete without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
All I can think about when you said that was timber. Okay, anyway. I'm going to use a bad word today for word of the day. At least in current American politics, it's a bad word. It's a dirty word. It's called concession. concession, an act or instance of granting or yielding, or a thing granted, an acknowledgement as of an argument or claim. Meaning, in today's politics, in my opinion, you're not allowed to give a concession. You're not allowed to look at somebody and say, oh my gosh, I don't agree with you, but that's a really good point. I had never thought about that before, because if you do that, it's a sign of weakness. Unfortunately, as we were talking about before the show, that was what our American experiment of democracy was founded on. Concession. The idea that we're going to bring people together with different ideas, different backgrounds, and we're going to make concessions to one another and to each state and say, okay, we're going to find common ground and we're going to solve a problem and we're going to try this grand experiment. It wasn't a dirty word when our founding fathers started this country. And we have to get away from it being a dirty word if we want to, again, in the vernacular of some of the people that I disagree with the most, make America great again. We have to start to concede. We have to start to say, you know what? It's not a sign of weakness that if somebody else makes a good point and you acknowledge that it's a good point, then you need to find a way to incorporate it in whatever it is, the problem that you're trying to solve. And understand that it's okay to be friends with somebody that you don't agree with everything they do. Justin's teasing me, you're saying you like this principle or that principle, being a teacher of 35 years. Didn't always get along with principles. And there are principles that I have gotten along with because they were doing what was right for kids. Now, there have been other principles that I was friends with them outside of school, and I argued with them all the time at school because, they did the same activities I did. They liked the same things. And so we were friends outside of school. But in school, I thought they were horrible because they were doing things that I thought were bad for kids. One doesn't preclude the other, or at least it didn't in my life. But it seems like now that's what you have to do. Well, we disagree, so we can't talk. We can't be friends. We can't do. concession, not a dirty word. It's something that we need to do if we want to move forward as a country.
Well, and in some cases, right, there's, I think, a big benefit to possibly spending time with people you disagree with more than with just people you agree with, because that's hopefully what widens our understanding. And that's exactly what happened in this town, right? The story, Lance, basically goes that an environmentalist lawyer, right, it was in the process of doing a lot of stuff that was essentially helping to get shut down multiple sawmills in John Day, Oregon. And
which was the mainstay of the
right.
economy in John Day.
Yeah, still is, right?
If the sawmills weren't running, then there was no town.
Exactly. So 2 of the 3 had shut down, and it looked like the third one was going to shut down when a bunch of loggers showed up at this lady, the environmentalist house, and asked her to come into the forest with them. Now, as some of you out there listening would think, and as she thought at the time, she actually said that her life flashed before her eyes because she thought, oh my gosh, what are they going to do to me? They're going to take me out into the forest and I'll never come back, and little did she know, and she, finally decided to go with them, right, Lance, and found out that they weren't there with malcontent. They wanted to explain to her and show her, look, this is our livelihood, right? This is the only thing that keeps this town alive. And if you kill this, you're going to destroy, the lives of not just these people, but these families, right? And their children and this town. And so does that mean that you should completely give up on all your principles? No. But part of what she then discovered is, well, actually, if we do some more selective cutting of trees, will actually benefit the health of the forest, decrease the likelihood of out of control wildfires, and we can keep a sawmill open and not completely ruin the local economy. So we can actually do something that's good for the environment, that still serves the need that we have, and nobody, gets 100% of what they wanted, because obviously the loggers probably would have preferred that, two of their sawmills hadn't closed and that they weren't running with just one mill. But is one better than 0? And that's the whole, right? And is having reduced non-selective logging in favor of selective logging better than having made no progress? And that's, I think, the big story here is, as you read this and as you talk about it, right, it becomes clear that, well, through this process, there's some of them now that looked at this lady with nothing but scorn and now openly admit, quoted in the article, right, as saying, well, she saved us because we were going to lose everything. And now at least we have something. And so evidence, right, Lance, that even in complex situations where there's a lot at play, sometimes we're more interested in just espouting our philosophy and our side than we are listening and saying, no, the people on the other side are people too, right? And they probably are either willing to believe what they believe for some reason, or they have their beliefs because of something, and in this case, it's they want to feed their families and they want to keep their job,
Well, it was the whole thing. That's not painted as rosy. When she first went out, she didn't change her mind.
No.
There was still a lot of contention, but what it did was it shows that the process means, as you said, you have to be willing to talk. You have to be willing to go to the other side and have real conversations, not talk at each other, but talk to each other. And then she did see where it was affecting humans. And she said, that bothered me. In the article, it says, I didn't like that this was happening to them, but I had to stand my ground because it was real. My belief in the environment was real. But then another friend got a hold of her, like you said, and said, this isn't the forest that you're trying to save. Because we don't cut down anything, and because of the climate, this has become a tinderbox, and it's going to destroy everything that you're trying to save if we don't cut down some of the newer trees. And obviously the loggers want to cut down the bigger trees, but then the government got involved and the local representative said, you know what? We're going to set this up where we're going to go in and together we're going to mark what you can cut down so that we can limit the fire hazard. And then you can harvest some of the smaller trees, which then allowed one of the 3 plants to stay open, and everybody got a job. Doesn't mean they still agree, they don't fight. But here's the interesting thing to me, the fallout. The representative who put this together to make it happen, to help all these people, lost their job in the next election. They were voted out because, oh my God, you gave in to the environmentalist. We are a logging area and you conceded to the environment. He did something good. He saved jobs, but because he conceded, he gave in to the environmentalist. The overall populace of his district voted him out of office in the next election. How in the world can we get good people who are willing to do things for the good of everyone if our response is, well, you gave in to the other side, and so we're going to vote you out of office? And that just saddens me. I mean, there's more to the story than that, and we're going to talk about it throughout the rest of the show. But if we say we want government to put aside their differences and work for the good of the people, then we have to reward it by electing those people that do that. We can't say, oh my gosh, we're going to disavow you because you're not partisan enough. We're going to judge you on how many times did you vote with the president or against the president. Either you're not progressive enough or you're not conservative enough. You don't support the progressives enough or you don't support President Trump enough. And if that's what we're going to decide with, then we're never going to get to this point where our political parties work together to do what's best for us. So that's my takeaway from this first segment.
Yeah. Well, the question becomes too, right? We have some big challenges on the horizon, folks, particularly in rural America. And not the least of which, right, is the logging industry and the communities that rely on it. But we've talked about oil, gas, coal, right? These places that we know, I mean, over the past number of years.
I don't want to interrupt, but you say rural America, but those of you who live in the big cities who are listening to the show, you don't exist if you don't have rural America. If rural America dies, you lose your food, you lose your wood, you lose your oil, you lose your gas, okay? You can look down your noses at us, but you don't exist in your big cities if those of us who live out here in the country don't do the things that are necessary for you to be able to live in your big city environment. I'm not putting you down, but I'm just saying, understand, there's that concession, right? We need you to produce all this stuff for us, but you need us to do all these things for you. And we only get along because the rural and the urban societies work together.
Sure. Well, and to the rural to urban side is if we don't have somebody to buy all this stuff and use all this stuff, we can't just produce all of it and expect to get paid for it either. Because it's not just, right, it's not just the farming and the logging and the oil, but it's also things like manufacturing, because you take little old Urbana, where we broadcast from, for example, and you've got one of the nation's and world's largest producers of commercial baking equipment. Do you like going and getting baked goods? Have you ever eaten a baked good? Well, there's a good chance that not only did rural America grow the ingredients necessary to bring that baked good to you, but that it was probably produced on a pan that was made somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. You know?
Exactly right.
And that's just one example of the many manufacturing places that are located outside of urban centers in smaller communities. Then they produce the things that we need, right? But at the same time, we wouldn't have any need for that plant if there weren't enough people out there in the bigger areas that need to purchase it. So it is the give and take. And sometimes it feels like that's what we've lost sight of, but that's what we're going to continue to talk about coming up, because not only is there this conversation about what we can learn from what they've been through, but also talking about the future of small towns. But then there's also the climate side of this, right? The cost of the timber industry and how all that works. So this story brings us a lot to consider, and we still need to take time to consider it. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The article that we're referencing today, which is linked at thestateofus.org, leads to basically explain that this kind of cooperation is brutally difficult. And it's referring to basically the compromise that was struck between the environmentalists and the loggers. Small logs are less profitable for the sawmill than large ones. And many people on all sides see those participating in the dialogue as sellouts. And Lance referred to this at the end of the last segment, which is this crazy notion that the representative who was part of all of this got voted out of office simply because they compromised, and that's where I think the sellout
found an answer.
Right.
Found an answer to a problem.
Yeah.
Found a solution to a problem, and you lose your job. Isn't that why you have a job? Don't we want
I don't know.
Don't we want
sure.
problem solvers? Don't we want people who solve problems rather than cause problems?
You would think, but
sorry, I'm getting a little loud here. I know.
No,
so
but
he's going to have to turn my voice down. But daggone it. That's what I want. That's what I want to teach. When I taught kids, learn how to solve the problem. Be it writing your paper, pass a test, coordinate study time with your after school activities. You got to learn to problem solve. And here's a guy who solves a problem and he loses his job.
Because play out the other scenario, right? He holds the line and isn't willing to make the compromise. So the last sawmill then closes. Well, and he stays elected because, we held the line. We lost, but we held the line. What?
People lost their jobs. People are thrown out in the street. They're homeless.
Yeah.
They have to relocate. The town dies.
Yeah. But we held the line,
But by God, I held. That's right.
Yeah.
I didn't give in. I didn't concede.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, what line did you hold? Because you lost, I mean, did you win by conceding? No, but you also didn't lose either.
You lost your job and your house because of those environmentalists.
Yeah.
We could have solved the problem, but it wasn't my fault because they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They didn't do what we wanted them to do. So it's not my fault you lost your job. It's not my fault you lost your house. It's not my fault that your kids lost their future. It's those daggone environmentalists. See, we'll just point the finger at who the real problem is. And if we get rid of those leftist environmentalists, then by God, we would still have a sawmill. We could cut down all the trees and you could still have a job. So see, what?
Yeah.
That's just so,
it's not true.
Silly.
And they just would have lost. The owner of the sawmill even said it. They were scheduling it to close.
Right.
And that's what was going to happen.
There weren't enough trees coming in.
Yeah.
And they found a solution. Let us know what you think, okay? Because I'm at a point where I don't have anything else to say. So Justin's going to have to ask me another question. But tell us what you think. Let us know at podcast@thestateofus.org.
The article, Lance, it ends with this, and I think it's important to share with folks. It is a good article. I mean, I'd recommend reading it because it gives you a little bit of hope, and it gives you maybe some sympathy, if hopefully not empathy, for your other human beings out there who are struggling with stuff on all sides of the equation. It ends by saying, the author writes, quote, "I normally cover people who are exchanging insults, occasionally gunfire. So there's something exhilarating about being in Brown's home in John Day." Brown, by the way, is the environmentalist, with loggers and environmental lawyers arguing amiably around a dinner table, antagonists who have also become friends. They roll their eyes in fond exasperation at things the others say, and across town, because of them, the sawmill is still spitting out boards and keeping John Day humming. Maybe there's something the rest of the country can learn from this handful of sellouts who saved a town.
Yeah, I know.
Well, because, Lance, and this goes back to the point that I mentioned at the end of the last segment, big problems, right? Big problems on the horizon and currently here right now today for rural America and the country as a whole. We've talked a lot about this on this show, right? The challenges that rural America is facing right now and why it's, as you pointed out, bad for the whole country. It's not just bad for the folks that live in these areas. It's bad for everybody. One of the increasing issues is the division, which leads to this whole, well, they're sellouts and we'd rather be poor and we'd rather lose everything than sell out. And we just can't, that cannot be the way that we think, because that's not how a democracy functions. It cannot be my way or the highway. Even if you believe that you're 100% right, you probably got to give ground if you want to get anything, because what we're heading toward is an increasingly polarized country where it's just, well, we just elect enough of my type of people and then everything will be fine. And we're seeing that that's not working, because what happens is then we elect your type of people and they spend most of their time just trying to undo what the last guy did. And then when the next guy gets in who's not on your side, then they spend all their time trying to undo what you did. And that's no way to, I don't know. That's just no way to live.
Right.
It's this whole, we're not even doing 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. We're doing 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So we're net losing, not net gaining. And that can't be the way that we're going to solve these problems, because we talked a lot about the economies of rural towns that rely on things like logging. They are going to die, right? Yes, it's awesome that they saved the sawmill for now. I would not put good money that in 50 years that sawmill's still there.
Right.
Or that if it's there, it's not operating, right? But that's the way that many small town industries are moving. And it's not just your ones that you think about like logging, oil, gas, coal, right? Yes, those industries, of course, we've talked about that. They've been in the news a lot. These, coal mining towns, or these oil fields, right? Or whatever it might be. Yes, there are those which we know, are moving in the direction of obsolescence. But there's also the things like the manufacturing that I mentioned a little bit before, Lance, right? Because as automation continues to take over, that's not just a problem that's going to face rural America. It's going to face everybody that's in those types of manufacturing positions. The more automation that comes into play, the less jobs there's going to be that currently exist. And that, to me, is it's going to take leadership, ingenuity, and most of all, something that for some reason we've gotten really bad at, which is sacrifice, right? Willing to give up a little bit to gain something.
Yep. I just want to leave you with this, folks, because we try to give you the problem and we try to give you the solution. And the end of the article, the author asked them, so what advice would you give other people for bridging hostilities and creating a peace process? And here's what both sides said. Okay. You have the owner of the sawmill, you have the loggers, and you have the lawyer, the environmentalist who was trying to shut down all of the sawmills. And, they came to a conclusion here. And this is their advice. They said a starting point is finding people from each side who are equipped with humility and empathy. Oh my gosh. You got to find people who care. Okay. Then when disputes arise, so notice, they don't say that it's going to be kumbaya. They admit that there will be problems. Both sides need to agree to defer to science. And what if nobody's ever looked into it before? Well, then they say, if the science doesn't exist, then conduct the experiments together to collect the evidence. Oh, so let's decide what it is we need to know. Let's go do it together. And then we'll know that it's fair and right, and we can't deny it because
everybody was part of the process.
Exactly, right? And then here's the one I like because I think this solves a lot of problems in the world. They say it doesn't hurt after you get done with the meeting for everyone to relax over a dinner together, and alcohol is always a plus. That's my motto in a nutshell, folks. You bring people together. You sit down and break bread together. And if you like a little alcohol, that's fine. Yours truly doesn't, but I'm not against it for others. But you serve some good food and you have some good conversation. It's amazing how attitudes change and problems can be solved.
Right. Well, some of what took place that they had, right, is, she was there and it's just, we got to stop logging. But then the environmentalists figured out as time goes on, well, no, actually, some logging might actually be beneficial.
Science!
Right?
Science!
Yes. Yep. Well,
we're going to follow the science.
Yeah.
I want to save the forest. Okay. And we need to cut down some of the trees. Oh, okay. I guess we better have a sawmill then.
Right. Well, because it would be pretty stupid to cut down the trees and just leave them. Right. It'd be a lot. It made a lot more sense to not cut down the trees and then have a natural disaster when a fire starts.
Right. And you have all these dead trees that ignite the fire and burn down all the good stuff, and none of the animals have a place to live, and all the trees are gone. Oh boy, you saved that for us, didn't you?
Not to mention everything that's going to go up into the atmosphere
Exactly.
as a result of your raging
all that
fire.
carbon
Right.
that then raises temperatures and the trees never grow back in the first place.
Yeah.
All because you couldn't cut down a tree.
Yep. Well, speaking of carbon, Lance, and that's the last thing that we have to talk about, right? We shift gears a little bit because there's a couple sides to this story. There's the one that we really liked, which is the lessons you can take away. But there's also this idea that, logging and things like it, right? Particularly rural economies are very reliant on things that unfortunately put a lot of bad stuff into our atmosphere. And we have to talk about that because, as you know, on this show, we're committed to, making the transition to clean sources of manufacturing, production, energy, and creating new jobs along the way while having humility and empathy and understanding that the transition of the economy is not going to be something that's easy, right? It's going to be hard. People are going to suffer, and we have to do what we can to minimize all of that. So let's talk about this new carbon market that's paying southern pine growers not to cut down their trees. Saying, wait, people getting paid to not cut down trees? That's right. You're going to find out more. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Companies such as Microsoft, Royal Dutch Shell pay timberland owners to keep trees standing in an effort to offset emissions. What? And you're saying, okay, so what's happening is there's these big companies out there, they feel bad about what they're doing to the environment, so they're paying people that cut down trees to not cut down trees. And you're saying, well, isn't that going to create problems because then we're going to make the price of lumber higher because there's not as much trees being brought down? And does that really do any good? And how long do they not cut them down for? Well, the good news is we're going to try to seek to answer all of those things. A little bit of the backstory, Lance, here, right, is the thinking with carbon offsets, for those of you that aren't familiar. Okay, we have a couple different terms that I think are important that folks understand. Offset, we're doing something to counteract something else that we're doing, to offset. In other words, I put +2 carbon out, right? And we're +2 carbon. I'm not using a particular measurement. I'm just, for the sake of argument, I put +2 carbon out. So now I need to find a way to subtract 2 carbon so that I'm back to 0, right?
So I can go on TV and advertise that I'm a carbon neutral company.
Yes.
I'm not really carbon zero because I'm still producing carbon.
Carbon zero would be, right, that what we do inherently does not put out carbon.
There is a positive, right? I mean, at least the carbon is not going up in the atmosphere. People are having to pay for. I mean, so we're getting it's a plus, right? I mean, instead of, it's a good thing. So, we'll talk a little bit later about how good it is, but there is a good side to this. Some people are getting money to let their trees grow, and they figured it out, and they're making more money letting the trees grow than they are if they cut them down.
But they've added it up and they've said, well, look, these are only annual agreements. So this is important, right? So the tree, we're only guaranteeing the tree is going to stay up another year. And you might say, so wait, well, then how does that do any good? Because if they're still going to cut it down, well, guess what? Every day that tree is standing is another day it has the ability to take carbon out of the atmosphere, right? So it's
plus, if you're not cutting it down, they're not crying at each other. Just a shout out to Andrian and
yes.
Cosmos. We know
yes.
If you're a long time listener to the show, you know that trees talk to one another, and when you chop down one of them, the other ones all start crying and send food towards the tree that is being cut down.
Oh, great book!
To try to save it.
Great interview. I think the only two-part interview we've ever had on a book, right, Lance? I mean, it's Cosmos, and it is still linked at thestateofus.org. So if you want to listen to it, or check out that book.
Interview. She gave us so much time and some really neat insights, and the book is fantastic.
Well, it opens your mind to a lot of stuff, learning about, how trees are interconnected and how honeybees have an advanced system of democracy that they use to make decisions. And I mean, it's just
a natural GPS system.
Right. It's just one of those, it's good because it's a mind opening experience. But But that's kind of what we obviously try to do here on the show by saying, look, there's these issues, but let's try to look at the different sides of it. And that's exactly what this story brings up, is this idea of, well, as we're trying to make this transition, what are we going to do? Because there's different things, right? There's how do we start the transition? How do we live through the transition? And what do we do when we get to the other side of the transition? And this is one of those, how do we live in the transition, right? The logging industry is probably not going to be around forever, at least not in the way that we think of it now. So knowing that it's an industry that's going to become obsolete, probably before I die, how do we manage the transition away from it in a environmentally and economically responsible way? And this is an example of that. I had told Lance before the show, I said, I think the key is I'm okay with somebody like Microsoft doing this if, and here's the caveat, right? It's not instead of investing in transitioning to more sustainable, long-lasting operations. Because if we're spending $200 million, right, on carbon offsets, and we're only spending, $1 million on transitioning, and these are not real numbers particular to Microsoft, they're just pulling them out of the air. $1 million on, transitioning to more responsible, production of, resources and that kind of stuff. Well, that's kind of backwards, right? Because we got to play the long game. Yes, we have to band-aid the situation in the short term, but we can't be upside down on this stuff because, as Lance has pointed out, this is never going to solve the issue, right? We've talked a lot about even if we stopped all emissions today, we'd probably still see at least another, a rise by at least 1 degree Celsius by 2050 and probably more than that. And that's if we stopped today. The point is it's going to get worse before it gets better. So we have to look at things that are going to reverse it and slow it down, but we also have to be investing in the permanent solutions and not just the Band-Aids, because Band-Aids won't fix this, right? I mean, we have our arm was severed. We can't just, we'll just put a Band-Aid on there. I mean, the Band-Aids will slow down the bleeding, right? But they're probably not going to stop it. So we're going to need probably surgery and some attention here and maybe be fit with a prosthetic, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things to go from just trying to stop the bleeding. At the same time, if we bleed out before, we get to putting on the prosthetic, that's no good either.
Right. This is an interesting concept, and that's why it caught our attention, is like, oh, okay. We want to save, some of us want to save the trees and want to save the environment. Here's a way to do it. You pay people not to cut down trees. That is an interesting concept. But like you said, it's not a long-term solution. It's a stopgap measure at best. And we can't let that, and that's what the point I want to make, as I think you did, but very simply, be careful when you look at these newspaper and magazine advertisements and these TV commercials where these companies are saying, we're doing away with carbon emissions. Okay. Don't let them just sell you on a 15-second or 30-second commercial. Find out what they're doing. Are they buying offsets, or are they really going to electric vehicles? Are they really going to a more streamlined transportation system that is cutting out producing carbon emissions? Or are they just spending millions of dollars buying offsets? Because to me, that's kind of a false claim if you're just buying offsets. So that's the only thing I really have to say here is this is a good stopgap measure, but don't be fooled by companies if all they're doing is buying offsets. Make sure, as Justin pointed out, they're also trying to decrease the amount of carbon that they're throwing out in the environment while they're buying the offsets.
Unfortunately, when you get into this, it's been discouraging for me, but we can't let it be only discouraging. We still have to say, okay, knowing is better than not knowing, because if we don't know, there's no chance of addressing it, right? It's that whole, when Brett and I, for example, first bought our first all electric vehicle, right? Well, that's great, because yes, buying an electric vehicle does reduce your carbon emissions. However, you still have to charge that electric vehicle, right? And there's a decent chance that part of the electricity you're using, if not all of it, is from burning a fossil fuel. Now, it's been proven time and again that you're still putting substantially less into the atmosphere, but you're still putting something into the atmosphere, right? So then the solution becomes we have to change how we're generating the power that we're putting into the electric vehicle. So that goes back to that conversation we've had a lot about the nuance.
Which is why you put solar panels on your house, right?
Exactly.
I mean, there are ways to solve this problem, folks. I mean,
there are.
Not that we're saying we're better than.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, let's follow through. And okay, this is a good thing to do. What's the better thing to do? And then let's eventually find the best thing to do. And the sooner we go from the good thing to the better thing to the best thing, and the sooner most of us start getting to the best thing, the better it will be for all of us and the entire planet.
There was definitely some hesitancy, right, to doing your first electric vehicle, to installing solar panels on your home. It's like, okay, I've looked at the finances. It looks like it should work out. But, you're nervous because you've not done it. You don't know if it's going to work out. You don't know, is this going to be an inconvenience? How is this going to, all the things that come with any kind of change. And I can tell you definitively that I don't think that Brett or I have a single regret in owning now 2 electric vehicles, only electric vehicles, and having solar panels on our house. But
you've done well the last 10 days here.
That's right.
Because the UV index has been high.
Uh-huh.
And
I've been watching it.
Yeah. You've been earning a lot of solar power for the wintertime.
We're building up that credit, Lance. We're pushing it up, right? Because see, here's how that works, folks, right? We're generating this stuff. What we don't need is going back out to the grid right now. And so our neighbors are benefiting from our solar power, and we're getting a credit for helping our electric company power these other homes, which allows them to burn less fossil fuels, et cetera. So it is and that's, again, like Lance said, that's not a better than. This is one example of something, but like I'm going to get an electric car and that'll make everything better. Okay. But now there's more steps to it, right? And that's the thing that becomes a challenge, is understanding there are more steps.
But I think it's important for the audience to know that we just don't talk about this stuff, that we try to implement not all of the things, but many of the things that we talk about, we speak from experience.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully it's not just...
we're not asking you to do something that we haven't already done or tried ourselves.
Exactly. So let us know your thoughts. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. We really like to hear from you. So please do send us an email, because that's part of our mission here, Lance, right? Is to foster, it's a lot like the original topic of today's show, right? Conversations.
Yep, that's it.
What a notion.
I mean, that's what we're doing here, right? Our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we've had another one today on carbon emissions and the big one, how to solve problems. And you say, I really like this show, and I'm going to go talk to my friends about it. And they say, well, where can we listen to this show? And you tell them, hey, I find it on Spotify or if you use Overcast or Stitcher, even Apple Podcast. Anywhere a podcast is found, you can find The State of Us, share the information, spread the word. We all benefit.
The State of Us is released Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. East as a podcast. So be sure to subscribe to it, share it with your friends. And we're also a syndicated radio program heard on the weekends in select talk markets around the country. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.